Hello. Today I'll be showing you how I made one of the dining chairs from the movie Parasite. This is the first video in what I hope will become a series where I attempt to recreate a prop from a movie or TV show that caught my eye. I'm starting here with this chair because it's the most recent project I finished and the only one I've actually tried to document so far. What you've been looking at so far are obviously shots of the finished product, featuring my dog Basil, who's only being used to distract you from some issues that I'll bring up later. But this is what the original chair looks like. I started this chair at the beginning of COVID, but stopped to work on another project, and I don't have any footage of me building the actual part you sit on because I hadn't planned to make this video at that point. I actually had all but one of my parts cut at that point too, so what you see here is me measuring out the mortises for the seat to fit into the back legs of the chair. In the future, I want to create things other than furniture. Sometimes I become obsessed with certain items or props, and I want to use the process of recreating those to help me learn new skills. Doing this, I could either end up with a piece that I have the joy of knowing I made with my own two hands, or a pile of garbage if I shit the bed. But hopefully in either case, I'll learn something. I've made a couple items in the last few years that fall into the former category. I bought the plans for Adam Savage's EDC-1 bag and spent a couple weeks learning how to use a sewing machine. That was about 3 years ago and I still use that bag regularly. The next item that I made was the reason that I put off building this chair. I spent about 6 months recreating Macintosh's ladder back chair for my girlfriend. You can see I made a 1/10 scale model out of balsa wood. Just kidding, here's the whole thing. I tried a couple different techniques to clear out these mortises. First, I tried using a drill press, and then later on, I tried using a plunge router with an edge guide. But in both cases, I came back with a chisel to clean up the edges and corners. The mortises didn't come out the cleanest because the chisels I was using were a little bit dull and beat up. Here I'm comparing the mortise to its adjoining tenon to see how accurate my measurements and cuts were. They ended up running a little small, so I gradually snuck up on their final width. The rear legs lean about 3 degrees off of 90, so here I'm marking the angled cut lines on both the floor rails and the rear legs. The lean is about 3 degrees, and I measured that by just holding a protractor up to a reference photo on my laptop. Here's a rough trim of those angled pieces. This will end up being a bridle joint that I cut flush after glue up later. Here I'm marking the other side of my bridle joint. I think I cut the first part of these pieces before I took a break on this project. At some point I realized that I was really rushing this project as an attempt to make up for the break that I took. So for the angled bridle joint on the rear legs, I really tried to take my time and make accurate markings and measurements to get the cleanest cut that I could. I left myself a little extra material here as well to come back and clean the joint up with a chisel. But I would do it a little differently the next time I make this joint. I would get proper chisels with flat backs and use a reference block with which to make the joint face flush. You can tell I'm just eyeballing it here based on my markings, and it didn't lead to the best result. Here I'm making markings for the joint for the backrest at the top of the rear legs. These are the joints where I ended up trying to use the plunge router instead of the drill press. This one started feeling pretty good, but since the leg itself is so thin, the router wobbled and ended up chewing out some extra wood. Right about there. Here I'm gluing up what became the backrest of the chair. Like the rest of this chair, I already had a piece cut from the beginning of COVID, with a really cool knot and a nice natural shine to it. But in the years since then, I just kind of lost it. And you'll see that I had another backrest ready to go, but the wood was such terrible quality that I knew I had to remake it. You may also notice that I sanded all the stains out of my workbench, and it is no longer disgusting. Here you can see the nasty backrest that I mentioned earlier. The only reason I use that wood is because I was getting down to the scraps of some free wood I got from a friend of mine, and I wanted every piece to come from the same stock. Even if I didn't use this piece, it was a snug fit and a good reference. You can tell I didn't learn my lesson from the last time I had to chisel one of these. And here's my first dry fit of the chair as a whole. You can really see the slop in these three pieces, but that's where wood glue and clamps come in. And there you go, a chair you can sit on. If I had to do this glue up again, I would add some more support down the center of the seat, because even with the piece going across the back, it started to droop slightly. When I mentioned my dog being a distraction from some of the major issues earlier, this is mainly what I meant. When I started making these cuts at the beginning of COVID, I was using an old Sears Craftsman table saw from the 80s that I pulled out of a shed that had the most crooked fence you can imagine. I was pretty inexperienced then, and I think the disappointment at the results that I was getting also partly led to the reason I stopped this for so long. When I came back to this project, I decided to use the pieces that were discouraging me in the first place. And yeah, that was partially out of laziness, but I also wanted to see if I could work around the problems that I had given myself. You can see in this clip that I was wrong to think that. This was a bad idea and I should have started over. Be not afraid. This is just a biblically accurate glue up. I did this glue up over the course of a couple days because I thought it would be easier and I don't have enough clamps to do it all at once. I glued some scrap wood on either side of the piece in the center of the bridle joint to give some clearance for the clamp. The outer faces of my joints weren't exactly flush, so I came in with a block plane to take some material out, which I'm pretty sure isn't how you're supposed to use a block plane, but hey, it worked. Removing material this way does slightly taper the legs, but I think it's pretty imperceptible unless you're looking for it. Another thing I would change if going back is using a block plane in place of the orbital sander on just about everything but the seat. It kind of rounded the edges of everything, which I expected, but I was feeling kind of lazy and I had just gotten it, so I wanted to use it. Sorry for doing this in portrait mode, but here are some details of the chair. I don't think any of these joints look too bad until you get here. That's pretty terrible, and so is that one, but they're snug. Just as a reminder, this is what the original chair looks like. Both a shot from the movie Parasite and then a shot from one of the showcases of the designer. And this is mine. And that's Basil. So I take back what I said about these joints not looking terrible. This one is not a great seam either. There's a bit of a gap filled by glue. Again, not great. From a distance it looks fine, and when you're close enough to see it, you're probably sitting on it. I don't know a lot about wood finishes either, so I just threw some butcher block conditioner I had on. But that's it. That's my rendition of the Parasite chair. I think it was a pretty fun and simple project to learn some core concepts, and at the end you get a nice chair. And if you're like me, you were probably thinking, the original is a nice, sharp, sleek, modern, angular chair. What is it actually like to sit on?